Canada's Wonderland in Vaughan, Ontario, Canada is home to 17 roller coasters, and this makes the Cedar Fair Park the largest amusement park in Canada. Now, the roller coaster collection is interesting. They have a really good top three, and then it just drops off after that top three, but there's still some decent rides in here. This is actually my home park, so I'm very familiar with how these rides run. I've ridden some of these hundreds of times, so I've been able to experience like the day-to-day differences between them, which makes this list kind of hard because a lot of them can move around based on how they're running on whatever day you happen to go. But I'm gonna try and take personal bias out of this and just make it the most objective list I can based on like how good the rides are. So that's what I'm gonna do in this video. Rank all 17 roller coasters at Canada's Wonderland. 17 is Taxi Jam. I don't remember much about this ride. I haven't ridden it since I was a little kid, but it's an ENF Miler kiddie coaster, but it's a really tiny ENF Miler kiddie coaster, so I don't imagine it's that aggressive. This is just the park's like tiny kiddie coaster to get the kids started. Number 16 is Wilde Beast. This roller coaster is really inconsistent, but when it's bad, it's bad. So I've had good rides on this thing, like every once in a while. I was actually there a couple weeks ago, and I got a pretty good ride on it, so I rode it again, and then it like murdered me. The layout isn't bad. There's a couple good pumps of airtime and some laterals, but you do not notice them because of how rough this roller coaster is. This is probably the roughest roller coaster in North America. It tries to kill you, but not in like the good way. It's just like rib smashing for the entire ride. This roller coaster, you get off and you're just like in pain, and that's not how roller coasters should be. It's not a roller coaster that I would recommend riding at all. Probably the worst wooden roller coaster in North America. Number 15 is Flight Deck. God, what a terrible roller coaster. This thing never has a line even on the busiest days. There's a good reason for that because this is just brutal headbanging for the entire ride. SLCs are kind of like some of them are decent, some of them are terrible, and some of them are like in the middle where they're sometimes good and sometimes bad. I don't think I've ever gotten a single good ride on Flight Deck. I ride it once every year at the beginning of the season, give it a courtesy ride, and I never do it again. This is just one of the worst steel coasters ever built. It's terrible. The park needs to remove this immediately. Number 14 is the Kitty SLC Silver Streak. Yes, I would take the Kitty SLC over Flight Deck. That's how rough Flight Deck is. This thing isn't bad. For a kiddie coaster, it's decent. It doesn't really do much. It just kind of meanders and turns around at slow speeds, so it's not something I'd recommend riding, but it's smooth at least, so it's got that over Flight Deck and Wilde Beast. Number 13 is Wonder Mountain's Guardian. This is barely even a coaster, so I debated whether I should put it on the list. It's more of a dark ride, but it's got a lift hill, it coasts around for a bit, and it has a drop track at the end, so and RCDB calls it a coaster, so why not include it on the list? This thing used to be pretty good actually. Back when it opened, like all the effects worked, the guns worked, and it was a good dark ride, but it just has not been taken care of at all. There's very little theming in the queue or anything. It's just concrete cattle pen, and then when you actually get on the ride, half the screens don't work. You can see in between the screens. You can see like concrete at the bottom of the screens. The guns don't work half the time, and the capacity on this ride is horrendous. It always has the longest line in the entire park. So yeah, Wonder Mountain's Guardian could have been good, but I think it was a massive failure, and the park either needs to renovate it or remove it for future expansion. Number 12 is Ghoster Coaster. This is a kiddie coaster, but honestly, these like kiddie wooden coasters are some of the best kiddie coasters out there, and they border that line between a kiddie coaster and a family coaster. Something I love about this ride, number one, is it has buzz bars, and even if it's a kiddie coaster, buzz bars will make it automatically more thrilling because there's like you have a ton of room, you have like a foot of room in between you and the lap bar, and that allows you to actually get some pretty decent airtime going over the first drop on a couple of these little bunny hills. Is it the most thrilling roller coaster ever? No, definitely not, and that's why it's not higher on the list. But for what it is, I don't really have any complaints about Coaster Coaster. The number 11 spot is Thunder Run. So this is a Mack powered coaster. I do not count powered coasters as credits, but RCDB lists this as a roller coaster, so I'm going to put it on the list. This thing is pretty fun. I haven't ridden it in a few years because it always has a really long line, and it's not really worth the wait. But I like it. There's some decent theming inside the mountain, which is cool. And just the aspect of going through Wonder Mountain is fun. You go around twice, so it's a decently long ride. It just isn't very thrilling. However, the fact that the effects work, the theming is decent, and it's you notice more that you're inside the mountain, that pushes this ride above something like Wonder Mountain's Guardian for me. Cracking the top 10 is Time Warp. A lot of people would rank this right towards the bottom of the list with like Flight Deck and stuff. I actually don't think this ride is bad. Is it like anything special? No, definitely not. Zamperla Valairs aren't built very well. The turns are pretty janky. The layout's not that great. It's not really fast or anything, and it is repetitive. However, there are a couple of things about Time Warp that I do like. The main one is the hang time on those inline twists. Like you're desperately hanging on to those little grab bars in front of you because you feel like you're just gonna fall out the back of the car. That's awesome. It's some of the coolest hang time you'll experience, and that's why I actually like these Zamperla Valairs. Rest of the ride, not that great. I don't think it's as rough as people say it is. Just if you can keep yourself in place pretty easily to stop your head from banging off the sides, and yeah, I don't think Time Warp is a bad ride. Number 9 is the Bat. This is the park's Vekoma boomerang, and this is like right in the middle of the boomerangs. It's got arrow trains on it, so you can get headbanging, but it's not that rough. It's just when you ride a bunch of coasters, Vekoma boomerangs, you'll have like ridden 1,000 of them and don't become memorable anymore. So I usually skip this on my Wonderland visits. I ride it maybe once a season just to like see how it is, and then I go ride rides I like more. But it's solid. The vertical loop, great positive G's, and I like going up that lift hill backwards. But yeah, it's a boomerang. Number 8 is a coaster that will always hold a special place in my heart because this was the first big roller coaster that I ever rode, and this is Dragon Flyer, the park's aerodynamics custom looper. This isn't as good as some of the larger custom loopers. You don't really get too much airtime on the drop, but the vertical loops do provide you with some good positive Gs, and it does run pretty smooth. So I like that. It's a classic, and I do hope it sticks around for a while. Taking the number 7 spot is the Fly. Of the family-based roller coasters here, I think this one is the best. Well, targeted families and actually work as family coasters, because there's a couple here that are targeted families but do not work very well as family coasters. This is one of the Mack Wild Mice, and this is one of the ones with the big drop first, which is always nice. Those switchbacks, you get good laterals, and that's the gimmick with these coasters. I don't ride this very much at all because it always has a long line, and it's not something that I want to wait in a long line for. But it's decent and it fits a good gap in the park. It works well in Canada's Wonderland's coaster lineup and providing something that pretty much anyone in the family can ride and enjoy. 6 is a classic wooden roller coaster, the mighty Canadian Minebuster. This ride is cool. It could be better than it is, but for what it is, it's solid. You get to go under some water slides, you go over some hills. A couple of them have some decent floater airtime, not every single hill. What this ride does exceptionally well is pacing. It hauls from the moment you dip off the lift hill right until the final brakes. My favorite element of the ride is that final helix in the tunnel. It is so loud as you're going through there, and the lateral G-force you get is very, very strong. You're pinned to the side of the train, and for being a 40-year-old wooden roller coaster, it runs fairly smooth. Just don't ride on a wheel seat, and you should be fine. This ride did go through some renovations when they put Splashworks in that altered it quite a bit, where they made a lot of the hills more drawn out. But it used to have pretty steep airtime hills, and if you look at some old footage of it, there is like looks to be some crazy airtime. So I do wish they kept the ride in its original state because it would be much higher on this list if it was. But for what it is now, I actually really like Minebuster, and I always give at least a couple rides on it on my Wonderland visits. Number 5 is Backlot's Stunt Coaster. Now, looking at this little Premier Rides launch coaster, you'd be like, okay, that looks like a fun family coaster. Wrong. This is not a family coaster. All three of these are really good, and in my opinion, this is the one that does run the best. I like this better than the King's Island and the King's Dominion ones. I don't know what it is. It's just more intense and forceful than the other ones. That launch and will have you pressed up against your seat, and you roll up into that double helix. I gray out on that thing every time. and the rest of the ride is aggressive low to the ground turns, a couple fun pops of airtime, and a really good head chopper when you dive under the bridge. This is just a super fun roller coaster that I would say most people could ride. It might be a little bit extreme for like younger kids, but it'll satisfy the thrill seekers and some of the families. And it's just one of the best family coasters out there, even if it's not really a family coaster. Or is Vortex. Of the aero suspended coasters out there, this one is definitely my favorite. I don't know how it picks up all the speed that it does, but you fly through this entire course. Like you turn off the mountain, you go down that drop, and then you're just boom, you're going like 55 something miles an hour. The swinging is crazy on this thing. You're like hitting 90-degree banks on some of those turns. My favorite is the one into the brake run, where it's almost like you're going like too much swinging. It's just super fun. It's really intense. It's got powerful moments of positive G-force, a great sense of speed, and good near misses with the trees and the supports of Yukon Striker. Everyone is in unanimous agreement as to what the top three roller coasters at Canada's Wonderland are. It's just how they are ranked that will differ from list to list. So here's my experience. I've ridden all three of these over 100 times, so I know them pretty well. Number three is Yukon Striker. Was the new for 2019 B&M dive coaster, tallest and fastest B&M dive coaster in the world, and it's also got a really unique layout with 4 inversions, including a vertical loop and 2 implements and a zero-G roll. Now, Yukon Striker has the potential to be the best dive coaster ever. It's very intense. You have great moments of positive G-force on the vertical loop, on the implement, and you really whip out of the top of that second implement. The drop is great, just dropping, hanging over that 245-foot drop and plunging down into the tunnel through Vortex's helix. Fantastic. My issue with Yukon Striker, however, is the restraints. This features the vest restraints, and these are really annoying on a dive coaster. When you do a vertical drop that big, you want to get airtime, and the vest restraints make it pretty impossible to get airtime on that drop, which is rather frustrating. As a result, I prefer a couple of the other dive coasters, Griffin at Busch Gardens Williamsburg and SheiKra at Busch Gardens Tampa. This Yukon Striker is a much better layout, but those rides have better restraints. Fix the restraints on this, you'd have the best dive coaster ever, but for what it is, it's a great ride and number 3 roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland. Number 2 seems to be the coaster that is generally considered the best in the park, and that's Leviathan. This was the first Giga coaster that B&M ever built, and it was a great start for that model. Just that 300-foot drop, almost straight down, just plunging into that tunnel. It feels like you're falling out of the sky. One of the best first drops ever. Leviathan also focuses a lot more on airtime than the other Gigas. I think it's got much better airtime than rides like Millennium Force or Intimidator 305, Fury. It does that much better. It's got floater airtime and one really good moment of ejector airtime on that speed hill, and this thing hauls. It just flies through the layout. A lot of people crap on Leviathan for not being very intense, and while it's not as intense as a ride like Fury or the Intamin Gigas, it's still pretty intense. There's some good positive G's at the bottom of the first drop on that first overbank. What this ride really does well is speed. Like, you do not lose anything through the course of this roller coaster. My only complaint about Leviathan, and pretty much the reason it's not my favorite roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland, is it is very short. You get off that thing and you're like, oh, I wish there was more to it. So other Giga coasters that provide longer experiences, I do prefer. I would say this is probably the weakest Giga coaster in North America, but it's still a great ride and one of my favorites in the park. My favorite roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland is actually Behemoth. This is the park's B&M hypercoaster, and I've done most of the B&M hypercoasters in North America. I'm actually missing the ones that people really, really like I haven't been on Mako or Candemonium yet, but this is up like really close to the top of the B&M hypers. The only one I prefer is Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. If you love a fun, long experience that will provide you with some great sustained floater airtime, this is your roller coaster. That first airtime hill after the drop, it's like 7 straight seconds out of your seat. It's crazy. It's one of the most sustained airtime moments ever. All the hills give great floater airtime. It's got an awesome first drop, and it keeps its speed pretty well. There are some trim brakes, but unlike other Cedar Fair B&M hypers, such as Intimidator and Diamondback, those trim brakes almost never hit. So you're always going to get a good ride on Behemoth. I think this one doesn't get too much attention compared to some of the other B&M hypers because of its location. It's up in Canada, so a lot of American enthusiasts haven't ridden Behemoth, but those who do usually rave about it, and I'm definitely one of those. This is one of the best B&M hypercoasters out there. This is also the coaster that I have ridden more times than any other. As of the time I'm recording this video, I've ridden Behemoth 375 times. So I know the roller coaster very well, and it's one of my personal favorite rides by B&M, and in my opinion, it is the best roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland. So that concludes my list of favorite rides at Canada's premier amusement park. This is my home park again, so I'm pretty familiar with each of the roller coasters here, which made this list pretty difficult. While the lineup here isn't the best, they do have a great top three, and there are a lot of coasters for you to ride, so I'm interested to see what your guys' favorite rides at Canada's Wonderland are. Leave your picks in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.